She thought about stopping, but something in the silence held her. God saw her. A bedtime story about almost giving up and being remembered by God. There are people who are so tired, they can't even ask for help anymore. There's a kind of weariness that can't be explained in words. It's not just physical, it's the whole soul that seems to carry an invisible weight. If you've come this far, maybe you know that feeling. Maybe you're the one who smiles in the church hallway, who lifts their hands during worship, but inside there's a silence no one hears. This story has no shouting, no grand revelations, no spectacular miracles that cause crowds to convert. It's a small story, like a dewdrop falling on a dry leaf. That's how God sometimes works, through a whisper, not an earthquake. If this story keeps you company tonight, if it touches somewhere inside you that needs a gentle touch, come back anytime. And if you'd like me to keep sharing stories like this, please subscribe. I'll only continue if it's with your permission, because I believe some conversations are too sacred to be forced. She thought about stopping. Maria, Anna, Rebecca, Deborah. It could be any name. It could be you. It could be the woman next to you on Sunday, the one nobody suspects is carrying so much. She didn't wake up one day and decide to quit. It happened gradually, like a candle that slowly burns down until the flame is barely visible. First, her prayers got shorter. Then her Bible stayed closed longer. She stopped responding to the prayer group messages. She kept serving in ministry, but her heart was drifting further away. On the outside, everything looked the same. The polite smile was still there. "I'm fine, just a little tired," was her automatic response. She still made breakfast for the kids, still sent in her work reports, still folded the laundry neatly, but inside, her heart silently screamed, "Is God still here? Does he still care?" If you've ever thought about stopping, about giving up on this journey of faith that sometimes feels so lonely, leave a comment below. I've thought about stopping. Don't be ashamed. Even Elijah, under the juniper tree, asked to die. Even David asked where God was. Even Jesus, on the cross, felt abandoned. She didn't want attention. She just wanted relief. There were days when the weight felt unbearable. It wasn't one big problem. It was 1,000 little burdens piled up. A teenage daughter who no longer talked like before. A marriage reduced to a practical partnership without warmth. The stack of unpaid bills on the table. An aging mother who needed more and more care. A church ministry that demanded smiles and availability when she could barely get out of bed. She took care of everything, carried everyone, but she no longer had strength for herself. People would say, "God won't give you more than you can bear." But she questioned if that was true, because there, alone in the bathroom after everyone had gone to sleep, the silent tears that fell seemed to say something else. They seemed to say that this burden was crushing her soul. And the worst is when you pray, and heaven seems silent. How many nights had she whispered prayers in the dark? How many times had she opened the Bible seeking a word, a sign, anything to show she wasn't alone in this journey? Lord, if you're there, give me a sign. It doesn't have to be big, just something. But the bedroom ceiling stayed silent, and the Bible sometimes felt like words from a distant time meant for people different from her. She kept going to church, kept serving, kept being that reliable sister everyone knew. But inside grew that dangerous voice that said, "What if all this is just a story we tell ourselves? What if there's no one really listening?" It wasn't unbelief, it was exhaustion, a soul-deep exhaustion that makes even faith feel too heavy to carry. And little by little, she began getting ready to stop, not all at once. Not with a big announcement, just letting go, letting the flame burn out naturally until there was no light left. Maybe no one would even notice the difference. Do you know this place? This silent valley where your faith still exists, but it's as fragile as the last thread of a worn-out cloth. If you're there right now, I want you to know you're not alone. And what I'm about to share isn't some fairy tale spiritual story. It's a quiet testimony of how God works when we're not looking. There were mornings she looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman reflected there. Her eyes, once bright with purpose and hope, now seemed dull, blurred by exhaustion. Her smile, once natural and spontaneous, now had to be formed consciously, like putting on an uncomfortable outfit. "How long, Lord?" was the question echoing in her mind, though it rarely reached her lips. It wasn't rebellious, just sincere confusion, not understanding God's ways, feeling like maybe she'd taken a wrong turn somewhere and now was lost in a desert without a map. At cell group meetings, she heard excited testimonies, the enthusiastic glory to God, stories of answered prayers, miracles, and open doors. She tried to feel genuine joy for others' happiness, but it was like watching a party through fogged glass. You can see it, but you can't feel the warmth. There was a unique loneliness in that kind of spiritual exhaustion. A loneliness even those closest to you can't fully understand. Because how do you explain that? Even surrounded by brothers and sisters in faith, even hearing worship songs, even reading the Word, there's still a void nothing seems to fill. Maybe I'm not doing enough, she sometimes thought. Then she'd try harder. Wake up earlier to pray, fast, write down verses, serve in yet another ministry. But the more she tried, the further her heart seemed to drift, as if she were chasing something that kept moving away. Other times, she'd think, maybe I'm asking too much. Then she'd try to be content, lowered her expectations, accepted that maybe her walk with God was more sober, less emotional, that maybe not everyone is called to experience that passionate closeness with the divine that so many seem to have. But deep down, there was a thirst that wasn't quenched, a longing for something real, authentic, and true. Not just rituals and memorized words, but a genuine encounter, confirmation that she wasn't alone in this vast and sometimes terrifyingly silent universe. Sundays became especially tough, getting dressed as if everything was fine, singing as if each word made sense, smiling as if her heart wasn't breaking inside. It was exhausting, and more she wondered how much longer she could keep up the facade. Did people notice anything? Maybe. Occasionally, she'd catch concerned looks, a whispered, "Are you okay?" after the service, a hand squeezing hers during prayer, small gestures that showed that even in her self-imposed isolation, she was still seen. But how to explain it? How to say that the faith which once comforted her now felt like a weight, that prayers which once flowed now seemed stuck in her throat, that even thinking of God sometimes brought more guilt than peace? So she'd smile, say she was just tired, that it was just a phase, that it would soon pass. And she kept carrying this invisible weight alone. One night, after putting the kids to bed, she found an old journal. Years ago, she had recorded her experiences with God, stories of answered prayers, verses that had touched her heart, reflections on sermons that had transformed her life. Reading those pages was like reading about someone else, someone she barely recognized, someone who lit up with God's presence, who saw purpose in every trial, who trusted without reservation. What had changed? Her, God, the circumstances, maybe all of that. Maybe life had been harder than she expected. Maybe she'd built up unrealistic expectations about how God would act. Maybe time and wear had eroded that initial, naive but vibrant faith. And as she closed the journal, a painful question emerged. What if this is all there is? What if faith is just that? Fleeting moments of clarity in the midst of long stretches of walking in the dark. What if what she was looking for, that unshakable certainty, that constant presence, was just an illusion? That's when the thought crystallized with frightening clarity. I could just stop, let all this go. Would anyone, even God, notice the difference? The idea didn't come with desperation or drama. It came with a strange calm, like a door finally opening after years of pressure, a way out of the tiredness, the doubt, the constant feeling of inadequacy. It wouldn't be a big move, just stop. Stop forcing, stop trying, stop hoping for something that never seemed to come. Simply accept that maybe this path wasn't for her and go another way. And for a moment, that thought brought relief, like dropping a load that's too heavy after carrying it for miles. Like finally admitting what she already knew deep down. She was tired, so profoundly tired. That night, she didn't pray. She didn't open the Bible. She just sat on the porch, looking at the starry sky, feeling the weight and the strange lightness of this unannounced decision, the silent ending of a journey that had started with so much enthusiasm. And it was in that moment of surrender, when she finally let go of expectations, demands, the desperate attempts to feel something, that a thought came, not like thunder, but like an almost imperceptible whisper. What if I'm closer than ever right now? It wasn't her own voice. It didn't sound like her usual thoughts, always filled with doubt and self-criticism. It was different, softer, yet more firm. And something about that thought, so contrary to everything she was feeling, made her pause, like a traveler who, about to give up on the journey, hears a distant sound suggesting the destination might be closer than imagined. Until one late afternoon she opened the Bible, without expecting anything. It was almost automatic. There was no fervor or expectation. Just the habit of years leading her to pick up that book before starting dinner. The kids were in their rooms. Her husband hadn't come home from work yet. Those few minutes of silence were rare and precious. She didn't even pray before opening it, just flipped through the pages, almost absent-mindedly. Then her eyes fell on Isaiah 41:10. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Words. Just words on a page. She'd read that verse dozens of times before. Nothing special about it. Nothing that usually caught her attention. Except this time, the words felt different, as if someone was speaking directly to her, not to an ancient people from thousands of years ago. Fear not, for I am with you. Not just, I am with you, though that's also true, but I am with you, in a way that suggested God's very being was intertwined with hers beyond time and circumstance. It was as though suddenly the words gained a dimension beyond printed text, like she could sense the weight, texture, reality behind them, not just a promise to people long ago, but a timeless declaration, as true now as it was then. I am with you, not I will be. which would imply a temporary or conditional presence. But I am, the same expression God used when revealing himself to Moses at the burning bush. The great I am, the absolute eternal existence. And this God, this I am, was declaring an unbreakable union with her. I will strengthen you. Present tense, not future. Not a promise for some distant day when she finally sorted out her spiritual life, but an ongoing process, happening right now, even if she couldn't feel it. I will help you. Again, present tense. The help was already in motion, working behind the scenes of her life, even as everything seemed to be falling apart. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand, the image of a strong, steady hand holding her up when her own strength failed, not because she deserved it, but because of God's righteousness, his unwavering commitment to his own promises and his unchanging character. She closed her eyes. She didn't sob. The tears didn't even fall. But there, in the stillness of that kitchen, with the late afternoon sun shining through the window and forming golden patterns on the table, she felt Jesus holding her on the inside. There were no audible voices, no heavenly visions, no chills or overwhelming emotions. There was just a serene certainty, like an anchor quietly dropping until it reached solid ground. I never left you. It was as if an invisible weight, maybe not all of it, but a significant part, had been lifted off her shoulders, not with a shout, but with peace. A peace that made no sense, considering nothing in her external life had changed. The bills were still there, family issues still loomed, physical exhaustion persisted, but something inside her had been touched and realigned. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand, not I will do it someday when you're worthy, or I will uphold you if you do everything right. Simply, I will uphold you. A continuous present tense. It was already happening, even when she couldn't feel it. She stayed like that for a few minutes, just breathing in that truth, letting it go deeper than her mind, beyond fleeting emotions, into that deeper place where real transformation happens. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something other than exhaustion, doubt, or fear. It wasn't exactly joy. Not yet. It was more like space, room to breathe, room to exist without the constant weight of inadequacy, room to be imperfect, yet still loved. It felt as if God was saying, I see you, exactly where you are, with all your doubts, fears, and weariness, and I'm still here. I never left. At that moment, she remembered something she had forgotten. Faith doesn't depend on our feelings. It doesn't depend on having our emotions in sync. It doesn't depend on ecstatic experiences or supernatural confirmations. Faith is simply trusting in God's constant presence, even and especially when we can't feel it. The pan on the stove began to boil, calling her back to immediate reality. There was still dinner to cook, kids to feed, a routine to maintain. Life hadn't paused for her little moment of epiphany. But as she stirred the pot, she realized something had changed. Not on the outside, but inside, like a small light turning on in a room that had been dark for so long. Not lighting everything up or answering every question, but giving enough light to take the next step. And maybe that's what faith really is. Not a path illuminated from start to finish, but a tiny light, just enough for the next step, and then the next, and the next after that. The most surprising thing wasn't what she felt at that moment, but what she didn't feel. The urgency to capture the experience, turn it into something grand, or share it as a spectacular testimony. It was an intimate, personal, almost secret moment, just between her and God. And there was a beauty in that simplicity that no public display could match. If you feel that way today, like God has been silent in your life for too long, comment here, "I'm still here, Jesus." Because even when we don't feel Him, even when we doubt, even when we almost give up, He's still the God who upholds us with His righteous hand. She didn't become a ministry leader. She didn't record her testimony. She didn't feel a blaze of fire. There wasn't a dramatic change that night. She still made dinner, still helped with homework, still talked briefly with her husband about everyday matters. No one around her would have noticed any difference. But when she laid her head on the pillow that night, she slept with peace. The peace only Jesus gives. The kind the world doesn't understand. The kind that doesn't depend on perfect circumstances or vanished problems. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. John 14:27. It was a peace unlike anything the world offers. It wasn't the absence of problems. The problems were still very real. It wasn't all her doubts resolved. The questions remained. It wasn't even absolute certainty that everything would be fine. The future was still uncertain. It was a peace that existed in spite of all that. A peace that said, even if the worst happens, you're not alone. You never will be. The next morning, she didn't wake up with a mission to evangelize the world. She didn't feel called to start a new ministry. She didn't have a revelation that would change her church. She simply opened her eyes and thought, another day, and He's still with me. It was a beginning, a silent restart. There was a different quality in the air that morning. The same tasks awaited her, the same responsibilities, the same challenges. But there was also something new, not a forced excitement, but a quiet determination. One step at a time, one moment at a time, one breath at a time. While making breakfast, she remembered another verse. Because of the Lord's great love we are not consumed, for His compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Lamentations 3:22-23. New every morning. She didn't need to carry yesterday's weight or worry about tomorrow. She only needed to receive, with gratitude, the renewed mercies for that day, that moment, that breath. Her teenage daughter walked into the kitchen, still sleepy, hair a mess. Instead of just handing her breakfast and moving on, she stopped. She really looked at her daughter, not just the difficult teenager who so often frustrated her, but the young woman growing up, facing her own struggles, bearing her own fears. "Good morning," she said, and then added something she hadn't said in a long time. "I love you." Her daughter looked at her surprised, and for an instant, the teenage indifference softened, revealing the vulnerable child still inside. "I love you too, Mom." It was a small moment, insignificant to any outside observer, but for her, it felt like a tiny confirmation. Yes, this is the way. One step at a time, one moment at a time. In the days that followed, little changed outwardly, but inwardly, there was a small flame that refused to go out, sometimes almost invisible, flickering against life's winds, but still there. The flame of a faith that doesn't depend on intense feelings or extraordinary experiences, just the simple truth that God is faithful, even when we're weak. She still had hard days, days when doubt whispered in her ear again, days when exhaustion seemed bigger than hope. But now, even on those days, there was something to hold on to, not an emotion, but a truth. Fear not, for I am with you. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, small changes began to happen. A whispered prayer before bed, a verse jotted down in a work notebook, a moment of gratitude watching the sunrise. No big spiritual gestures, just signs of a life starting to flow again. There was a newfound gentleness in her relationship with God. No more constant pressure to feel, to experience, to arrive. Just a daily walk, a recognition of His presence, an acceptance of both the clear moments and the confusing ones. One Sunday during worship, she realized she was singing, not out of obligation, not to impress, not as an empty ritual, but with a simple sincerity. The words took on a new meaning, not because suddenly everything made sense, but because she'd learned that faith often means singing even when the notes don't all seem to harmonize. The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in Him, and I am helped. Therefore my heart greatly rejoices, and with my song I will praise Him. Psalm 28:7. At a prayer meeting, a sister shared her own struggles with faith. Hesitant, looking at the floor, she admitted she sometimes felt her prayers didn't go beyond the ceiling, that sometimes she doubted whether God really cared about the details of her life. At another time, she might have offered easy answers, memorized verses or spiritual cliches. But now, she looked at that sister and saw something familiar, the same journey, the same dark valleys, the same unanswered questions. Instead of advice, she just held the sister's hand and said, "I understand, and you're not alone." There was no condemnation in her voice, no judgment, just the empathy of someone who had walked and was still walking a similar lonely road. And in that simple moment of human connection, she realized something she had lost sight of. Maybe her journey through the desert wasn't just for her. Maybe her doubts, struggles, and near-quit moments had a bigger purpose, to prepare her to reach out to others walking the same lonely path. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our tribulations, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any trouble with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. 2 Corinthians 1:3-4. Her faith was changing, evolving. It wasn't the naive, energetic faith of a new believer, expecting miracles at every corner and reading every coincidence as a divine sign. Nor was it a cynical, hardened faith that expected nothing and shielded its heart from disappointment. It was a more mature faith, quieter maybe, less explosive, but deeper, like a tree that, after surviving storms, puts down roots that go well beyond the surface. She didn't talk about it. She didn't need to. This wasn't a story for a Sunday testimony. It was a story between her and God, the God who saw her when she felt invisible, who heard her when she had no words, who upheld her when she thought about stopping. And maybe that's the biggest beauty of the gospel. It's not just about extraordinary stories of instant healing or dramatic conversions. It's also about these small stories of faithfulness in moments of weakness, of grace in hidden places, of a God who doesn't abandon us, even when our faith is as small as a mustard seed. One day, while tidying the bedroom, she found that old journal again, the one she'd read months earlier with a mix of nostalgia and sadness, feeling so distant from the enthusiastic young woman who wrote those pages. This time, as she flipped through them, she didn't just feel distance. She felt a strange continuity, as if the young woman and the woman she was now were part of the same story, a story still in progress, with chapters yet unwritten. She picked up a pen and, for the first time in years, wrote, "Today, I don't have any great revelations to share. I haven't seen angels or heard trumpets. I've just felt, amid the ordinary tasks of an ordinary day, that I'm not alone, that I never was, that God's silences are not absences, but spaces where He works in ways I still don't fully understand. And maybe that's what faith is, keeping on when the path isn't clear, continuing to trust even when the heart doubts, continuing to believe that behind everything there's a purpose, a plan, a God who knows us by name." They were simple words, honest, without the over-the-top fervor of someone trying to convince themselves of truths they haven't fully experienced yet. But there was an authenticity in them that her earlier, more exuberant writings sometimes lacked. Jesus never promised the path would be easy. He himself said, "In this world you will have trouble." But he finished with the promise that sustained this woman. "Take heart, I have overcome the world." John 16:33. She didn't overcome all her problems that night. She didn't find answers to all her questions, but she rediscovered the face of the God who had never stopped looking at her, and that was enough to keep going. A few weeks after that night in the kitchen, a church friend noticed something different about her. It wasn't anything that could be easily explained or defined, just a quality in how she was present, as if she'd found a way to fully inhabit each moment without the constant restlessness of someone always searching for something else. "You seem at peace," her friend said, both curious and admiring. She smiled. How to explain? How to put into words the journey she'd taken? Not a heroic journey of huge trials overcome, but an inward one, through deserts and dark valleys, to this place of quiet confidence. "I'm learning," she simply replied. And it was true. She was learning to live with the questions, not just the answers. Learning to trust in the dark, not just in the light. Learning that faith isn't a straight line but a winding path through mountains and valleys, through seasons of abundance and deserts of lack. She was learning that God didn't love her for her strength, consistency, or unwavering belief. He loved her in her weakness, in her doubts, in her moments of almost giving up. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? Romans 8:35. The answer echoed in her heart, not as a theological formula, but as an experienced truth. Nothing, not even our own doubts, not even our own failures, not even our moments of nearly giving up. Maybe you're going through a time like this now. A time when your faith feels fragile and the heavens seem silent. A time when you've thought about stopping, giving up, just letting it all go. If that's you today, I want you to know you're seen, not just by me telling this story, but by the God who knows every silent thought of your heart. The God who was with the Hebrews in the desert, with Daniel in the lion's den, with Paul in prison. The God who promises, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." Hebrews 13:5. And if you need to pause for a while, rest, breathe, that's okay. Jesus isn't in a hurry. He'll wait as long as it takes. He waited for Peter after he denied him. He waited for Thomas and his doubts. He waits for each one of us in our moments of faltering faith, because faith isn't about never failing. It's about always coming home, even after every stumble. It's about letting God find us, not just in our moments of strength, but especially in our moments of weakness. Remember the woman in our story. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't experience a dramatic transformation, but she found something precious in the midst of her struggle, the certainty that she wasn't alone, that she never had been. And behold, I am with you always, to the end of the age. Matthew 28:20. This promise isn't just for the strong, confident, unshakable ones. It's for all of us, especially in the moments when we feel weak, uncertain, and ready to give up. That woman continued her journey, one day at a time, one prayer at a time, one small act of faith at a time, not as an invincible spiritual warrior, but as an honest pilgrim, sometimes strong, sometimes weak, sometimes full of faith, sometimes wrestling with doubts, but still going each day, upheld not by her own strength, but by the grace of the one who called her by name. And maybe that's the real victory, not the absence of struggles, but the constant presence of God in the midst of them, not the perfection of our faith, but the perfection of the love of the one we trust. One afternoon, as she was reading the Bible again, this time not out of mere habit, but because something in her was drawn to those words, she found another verse that felt like God was speaking right to her heart. For I, the Lord your God, hold your right hand. It is I who say to you, fear not, I will help you. Isaiah 41:13. And for the first time in months, she smiled, a small, almost imperceptible smile, but genuine, because she understood her story with God wasn't over. In fact, maybe it was just beginning in a new way, deeper, more authentic, more real than ever, not because she had all the answers, but because she'd learned that even in the questions, in the doubts, in the darkest nights of the soul, God remains, and that's enough. Her faith was different now, not the naive, enthusiastic faith of early conversion, nor the hardened, cynical faith that no longer expects anything. It was a tested faith which, though bruised, hadn't been destroyed. A faith that understood both absence and presence, both silence and whisper, and had discovered God in both, like Job, who after everything said, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." Job 42:5. There was a new depth in her relationship with God, an intimacy not born from moments of spiritual ecstasy, but forged in long nights of struggle, doubt, and near despair. An intimacy born in the valley, not on the mountaintop. The struggles didn't vanish. Difficult days still came. But now there was an anchor, a quiet certainty that went beyond fleeting emotions or changing circumstances. Fear not, for I am with you. And maybe you need to hear that today too. Maybe you need to know you're not alone on this journey, that your silent struggle is seen, that your hidden tears matter to God, that your prayers, though they feel stuck under the ceiling, are heard in heaven. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their cry. Psalm 34:15. This story doesn't end with a big miracle or a spectacular transformation. It ends with an ordinary woman, facing ordinary challenges, living an ordinary life, but now with a renewed awareness that she's loved and upheld by an extraordinary God. And maybe that's the greatest miracle of all. Not the ones that happen suddenly, with lights and trumpets, but the ones that unfold slowly, in secret, transforming broken hearts into temples where God dwells, restoring, day by day, what seemed lost forever. For this is what the high and exalted one says, "He who lives forever, whose name is holy, I live in a high and holy place, but also with the one who is contrite and lowly in spirit, to revive the spirit of the lowly, and to revive the heart of the contrite. Isaiah 57:15. Have you ever felt that way? Contrite, broken, as if life's weight had crushed something inside you, something precious and vital. If yes, this promise is for you. The God who dwells in eternity, the high and exalted one, isn't just in lofty holy places. He is especially with the broken, with the weary, with those who can barely lift their heads under life's weight. And he's not just there. He comes to revive, to restore, to breathe life once again into weary spirits and contrite hearts. That's the beauty of the gospel. It's not just for the strong, successful, and unwavering. It's especially for the weak, tired, and those who've thought about quitting. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28. That's the voice she finally heard, not like thunder in the sky, but as a whisper in her heart. The voice of a Savior who knows fatigue, who understands oppression, and who doesn't offer a quick fix but an invitation. Come, rest, let me carry this with you. And in the end, that's what we all seek. Not answers to every question, not solutions to every problem, but the certainty that we're not alone, that we are seen, that we are loved, not despite our weaknesses, but including them. If this story spoke to you, if it echoed something you're going through now, let me come back another day to continue the conversation. Only if it's at your pace, only if it's with your permission. Because I believe some of the most important conversations happen that way, in silence, with respect, and a mutual understanding that every faith journey is unique and sacred. And if you know someone who might be going through that now, someone who smiles at church but cries at home, someone who serves faithfully but is exhausted inside, someone who still shows up yet has already considered quitting many times, share this story with them, not as a magic solution, not as a spiritual fix-it-all, but as a gentle whisper saying, "You're not alone. Your struggle is seen, and God is still with you, even when everything seems silent." If you'd like, subscribe whenever you feel ready, and share with those who are tired of fighting in silence. There are more stories like this on the channel, stories that don't promise easy formulas, but offer companionship along the way. Stories that acknowledge both the beauty and the difficulty of following Jesus in this broken world. Stories that speak to the heart, not just the mind, but listen whenever your heart asks. When you feel you need it, in your time, at your pace. Because true faith isn't about pressure or performance. It's about grace. It's about rest. It's about finding, even in the darkest moments, that tiny light that never completely goes out. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smouldering wick he will not snuff out. Isaiah 42:3. That's the Jesus we know. That's the Jesus who knows us. And that's the Jesus who was there in that kitchen with the tired woman who thought about quitting, but found the strength to keep going one more day, and another, and another. Because in the end, that's what faith is about. Not heroic leaps, but small, faithful steps, one after another, sometimes stumbling, sometimes falling, but always getting up again, upheld not by our own power, but by the grace of the one who called us by name. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. Isaiah 43:1. Rest in that promise today. And remember, even when you think about stopping, there's something, someone in the silence holding you up. Playlist. Stories for when you feel like giving up.